There we go. Okay, sorry. The recording took a while to start. All right, welcome everyone to the Solana Foundation Validator discussion, December 12th, 2024. Agenda's pretty busy today, so we'll talk about some validator updates. Just a reminder about educational workshops and I guess a plea for more topics. I'm going to kick that off again in 2025. We have Ashwin here from Anza. He's going to talk about SIMD for slashing, sort of part one to get us ready for slashing, and then some future plans. So he'll present on that. There's been a bit of discussion on Twitter and elsewhere about Mempools and Sandwiching. So I've got the links up there. I just wanted to see what the community's thought is on that, and then open discussion if people have any other topics to discuss. So let's get into it. So first, mainnet beta updates. 2.0.18 is the recommended version for Agave. That does fix a bug with snapshot sizes. So if you haven't updated, please do so. The more the cluster updates, hopefully the better snapshots will be on mainnet. I think.
Tim, can I throw a comment in there real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
So it's more than snapshot sizes. It has to do with a resource leak on the accounts DB. And we're noticing dramatically better performance from any prior version of 2.0, to the point that it's actually affecting your vote credits. So if anybody is still on a version of 2.0 that's less than 0.18, I do recommend you get upgraded, because you'll notice a nice bump both in validator performance, and you'll get some extra vote credits too.
I think Brooks is on the call. If there's anything to add there, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thumbs up from Brooks. So please upgrade. Okay, yeah, FireDancer version recommendation is 202.2016. So there's not a lot of operators on FireDancer yet, but I anticipate that number to change. So going forward, I'm going to keep a practice of making sure to get the recommendations for both and kind of change announcements to include both. So just be aware of that. A couple of feature activations to celebrate. So since the last call, for the Solana Foundation call at least, TVC has been activated and partition epoch rewards have been activated. So huge accomplishment there for the community, for core devs, for everyone. TVC obviously has been kind of pushed for a while from Zentetsu and a lot of others in the community, and partition epoch rewards as well. If you're not familiar, this is a feature at the start of each epoch to figure out epoch rewards, not on the first slot, but over the course of multiple slots, which makes the beginning of epochs much more bearable than they used to be. I think delays were much longer than they are today. So big kudos to everyone there. As far as future feature gate activations go, the SIMD 148 should be activated relatively shortly. Let me pull up this feature gate schedule. So 148 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th on the list. So given that timeline, probably sometime in early 2025. If we scroll down here a bit, these are all pending on mainnet, which means they've gone through activation on testnet and devnet already. If we scroll down to the devnet activations, the next one that's interesting to validators, I'm assuming, is this full priority fees to validators. So you can essentially think of that as, let's count again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th in line to get activated on mainnet. So again, that would put it sometime in early 2025. This ordering could change depending on the needs of the cluster, but that gives you just a rough timeline of when to expect this. Usually you can expect about 2 activations a week, plus or minus, and probably a little quieter during the holidays. So that would put this sometime in early 2025, and this one, maybe a month later, somewhere in there. One more I wanted to mention. Yes, get epoch stakes, which should help with governance to figure out how much stake each validator has, is slated for 2.1. So that will probably be sometime in maybe Q2 2025, probably April-ish, I would imagine. But again, things can change, but that's the rough timeline. Any questions on feature activations, what has been or will be activated? I'll drop this link in chat as well. Very useful resource if you are curious when stuff's going to be on Mainnet. All right, moving along. Testnet recommended version is 2.1.15 on Agave, and FireDancer is 202 2016. I think Testnet is still down, but I'm double checking the chain right now.
No, we're up.
Oh, we're up. Cool. All right. Awesome. So yeah, back up today. Congrats. Good work, everyone, to get Testnet down and then back up. I think the point of this whole exercise was to give operators a little bit more practice with restarting and building a snapshot yourself. So for people that went through that full process, good job. For people who just downloaded a snapshot, ideally that shouldn't be the case, especially in a mainnet situation. Hopefully it never happens, but if it does, you want to use your local state, not just get a snapshot from someone else. So we will likely do more of these in the future. Just be aware, it's something you should practice, something you should be aware of, how to do mechanically. Also keep on lookout for future announcements this month. We will likely do a swap of testnet to have all validators on FireDancer. So look for that announcement coming soon. Any questions about testnet? Testnet announcements. All right. Let me here. Quick plug for educational workshops. We'll likely do another one in January 2025, sometime that week, so like the third week in January. If there are any suggestions for topics, I'd love to hear them now or in MB planning. So some ideas are FireDancer type topics, best practices that we haven't covered yet. But is there anything that people can think of now that they'd like to see or learn about? Or anything that's coming up a lot in Discord? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hello. I was having trouble accessing the metadata, uploading the metadata of tokens. It's just a thing I was working on, and if anybody would have an answer, I would be, very helpful.
Token metadata, you said?
Yep.
Yeah, that's probably outside of the scope of this workshop. There are other Discords that might have, more appropriate help there, but probably not appropriate for this call.
All
yeah,
right.
Go ahead, Chris.
One of the things that we didn't get to during last week's community validator call was performance metrics. I was planning to put that back on the agenda for next month, but it could warrant a deep dive, just going through the different performance metrics that are measured and thinking about which of those are the most important and understanding how they could be improved. Could be something that might be worthwhile.
Cool. Yeah, that's an interesting topic. Are you looking for performance on like a particular like vote performance or for replay performance, or just more generally like, I guess, what metric are you looking to optimize?
Well, when I was thinking about it, when we were going through our upgrade process, we started looking at a bunch of different metrics. We started with skip rate and then moved on to vote latency. And then I discovered Zan's performance pool, and there are a lot of really good metrics in there too. So I think just really understanding, like, is there one, like, for example, is vote credits the roll up of all these other performance metrics? So, do you start by looking at vote credits, and if your vote credits are good, everything else is good? Or, do you have to look into individual metrics as well? So, I mean, they're all tied together, and I think different people have different ways of thinking about performance and measuring performance and reporting on performance. So I think maybe starting with just a general top conversation as to, what are we ultimately trying to optimize in terms of performance metrics, and how can we understand if we're actually making progress in that direction? And then that would probably lead down into a lower level discussion of the individual performance metrics that all roll up into, I guess, essentially vote credits at the end of the day.
Yeah, okay, I think that makes sense. Yeah, so let's plan for that. I think if I'll kind of think through what makes like a good way to structure it, and maybe Zan could talk through his performance metrics as well. I don't know if he's on the call or not, but I think that would be a good topic to do. So
and depending if that's earlier in the month, we could then just provide a summary during the community validator call too.
Awesome. Yeah, open to feedback on timing also. I think I was going to do it the week in between the foundation call and the community call, but it could also be later.
I think that would work, because then you could have the deep dive, and then we could just present a summary during the community call at the end of the month.
Okay, great. That sounds good. All right, thank you. There's a question about when 2.0.19 will be recommended for Mainnet. I don't know the answer to that. I think it'll probably be delayed at least a week, mainly because Will, who usually manages the releases, is out, but don't quote me on that. I don't know for sure. Okay, moving along. Yeah, so we talked about this last week, I believe, in the community-led call. But Ashwin is here to give, I think, probably a better and more succinct presentation on his proposal for slashing, and specifically SIMD 204. So I'm going to kick it off to Ashwin to talk about it.
Hey guys. Sorry, let me share. Cool. So I work on the consensus team at Anza, and we're looking to implement slashing and wanted to get some community feedback, some preliminary feedback. We've been talking to a lot of stake pools, institutions, and definitely want to hear from the validators. So essentially, the scope of slashing is that there are violations within the protocol that are difficult to detect in real time. So these include any sort of malicious activities, submitting 2 blocks for your leader slot, double voting, violating the voting protocol. So we need some sort of mechanism to observe these violations and also potentially punish violators. So the first step for this is some sort of on-chain program that can record these violations. So up to 1 epoch after the violation occurred, anyone that observed it can submit a transaction with a proof that this violation occurred. And then this will be recorded on-chain and observable to everyone. And then the second step of this is to actually take action. So to aggregate these violations and slash stakes. So what we're considering right now is burning some percentage of the delegation and rewards. But that's mainly what we want to get your guys' feedback on. So the first step, SIMD 204, is this observability aspect. So it creates this on-chain program, the slashing program, that allows anyone to report slashable behavior. So basically what will happen is we will release tools to create, to basically attach to your validator, if you so choose, to observe these events, create a proof, write it on chain, and then send the transaction. And then the program will validate that the proof is valid, that something slashable actually occurred, and then it will populate this report account. So this report account will keep track of all of the violations that occurred in the epoch. So this could be useful even outside of slashing, just for validator dashboards, showing like statistics on how often a validator has violated the protocol. It's also useful for stake pools, just general, anyone deciding to delegate stake would find this useful. And the cases that we're looking at right now, the initial case that we want to lead out with is duplicate blocks. So when it's time for your validator to submit a block, a malicious validator could submit 2 or more versions of that block. So this is more taxing on the network. There's a lot of overhead and some extra communication that has to take place. And this really starts to degrade performance, especially if we see, like 10% of blocks are coming out as duplicate. So the Solana protocol already detects when this happens, and the validators gossip this around and decide to skip the block. So what we would do instead is we would keep the same flow, but also submit this extra transaction on chain so that it can be observed and recorded. And I just want to point out that this isn't some sort of random occurrence that can happen to anyone. This has to be intentional. The validator, so most often on accident, you see maybe someone's running a hot spare and they have multiple instances of their validators running. We have checks in the code to shut down your validator if it observes another instance running. So it would be extremely rare for you to accidentally submit duplicate blocks without malicious modification of the code. And then in the future, we want to also cover voting violations. So we have rules that govern when you can vote on certain forks, and specifically rules about, switching votes between different forks. And we already have, we have a bot running in the Discord that Michael Vines wrote that catches these violations and reports them. So the next step would be to actually submit this proof on chain. And these types of voting violations definitely slow down the protocol. It's more taxing to figure out what is the right fork when you have a bunch of people double voting, but it's not consensus breaking unless more than a third of the stake performs these violations. And then also, it would be exceedingly rare for you to accidentally double vote. It either requires intentional modification, or even if you have a hot spare setup and you forget to copy over the power or do something like that, we have checks in the code that will grab your latest vote from on chain and make sure everything is kosher, and make sure that you don't submit a slashable vote. So once again, it's not like a random occurrence that can happen to anyone. So that's what SIMD 204 is about, just recording these violations on chain. And then in a future SIMD, we actually want to tackle the economics of slashing. So for our rollout process, we're thinking we initially open up a discussion on GitHub, try to get as much feedback from the community as possible. And then after that, we move to a full SIMD, which will require a governance process to enact. So kind of the principle of like how much to slash, right? So we have a couple things that we want to consider. The first thing is we don't want to slash one-off operator errors. So even though it's exceedingly rare, if there is somehow some fault in the code and a small percentage of operators end up double voting, and it doesn't really impact consensus, then we want to have some sort of buffer to overlook these. So we're still in talks about what the best buffer would be, but the consideration right now is the Nakamoto coefficient line, which basically means whatever the smallest validator in the super minority is, that's your buffer. So I think it's sitting right around 1% right now. So if the total number of violations accounts for less than 1% of the stake, then no one gets slashed. On the other hand, if consensus is at risk, so more than a third of stake is committing violations, then we do want to take extreme action and slash 100% of the stake. And then finally, we got to address the situations in between. So the proposal right now is to use this quadratic formula. So it's basically a ratio of how much stake committed slashable offenses versus the total stake squared. So for comparison, this is this red curve at the bottom. And for comparison, Ethereum uses a very similar mechanism, except they use a linear curve, which is the black line here. And just so you get an idea of numbers, you know, if 5% of stake commits a violation, we expect that approximately 1% of their delegations will be slashed. 10% of stake commits a violation, then 7% will be slashed. And then if 1/3 or more of stake is violating, then 100% of their delegations will be slashed. So yeah, this is kind of like what we're thinking right now, and we would love to hear some feedback about either SIMD 204 or if you have any comments about the economics as well. Looks like there's a bunch of questions in chat. Yeah, so will the violation reports be rewarded? So this was something that we considered, but ultimately it is hard to do this properly because the leader can always front run your transaction. So if I was a leader and someone submitted a proof transaction to me, and there's a reward if you're the person who reports it, then I should just submit the transaction myself and censor their transaction. So we think the reward in this case would just be the fact that some percentage would get burned, and that's valuable for the remaining honest validators. And then, what do you mean you must only have one validator running? Yeah, as Michael said, you can't run two validators with the same identity. And then, yeah, so for the SIMD 204, it doesn't plan to adjust any stakes or rewards or anything. It's only just for reporting. And let's see, validator just running Atlas-like programs. I'm not really familiar with Atlas, but in this case, it's specifically anything that produces two blocks for the same slot. If you're just sending transactions, then you won't be impacted by this. And then, yeah, the reports require, the report is just a regular Solana transaction. So any spamming there would incur the same fees as any regular transaction you're attempting to spam. There's no like global write lock or anything. You can't stop anyone else from reporting by spamming your own reports. Yeah, so the validator having to submit the proof, basically you don't need to submit the proof, right? So you only need one person to submit the proof for every violation. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a validator. It could be an independent observer or, you know, just one validator. The idea, why wouldn't it be implemented automatically, is because it's hard to run a synchronous consensus when the event happens. So if you imagine a duplicate block is being propagated, there would be a lot more overhead for the network to then halt at that point and say, does everyone agree that they observed the duplicate block and slash them immediately, versus taking care of it after the fact, as in someone sends the transaction, we validate it, and it just goes through the normal Solana consensus, just like any other transaction. Yeah, so the check isn't manual. Yeah,
I see a question from Chainflow. If how far back could a report be submitted?
Yeah. So right now the statute of limitations we're considering is 1 epoch. So from the slot in which the violation occurred, you have the 400,000 slots to report it. If it's not reported in that time, then it doesn't qualify.
Is it basically an entire, like, okay, what happens if the violation happens at the end of epoch 400? Then do you have the end of epoch 401?
Yeah, it's just 432,000 slots. So it doesn't matter where in the epoch it happens.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so Chainflow brings up a good point where the validator commits the violation, then unstakes before the violation is reported. So that will be addressed in a follow-up SIMD that Justin Starry is working on to address issues that we have right now where, where we think there should be some extra holding period. We're still working on it, but as pointed out, you could commit a violation and then immediately unstake before anyone has a chance to report it. None of this is live currently. It's still in the SIMD process, not live on Testnet yet.
Hey, Ashwin. Quick question. Do you think that validators will automatically run this kind of slashing detection embedded in the validator code, or is this going to be kind of a standalone tool? And if everyone runs it, everyone will be submitting reports. So could you just do it like, if you have to be the leader, well, the leader is the one that automatically submits a report? Yeah.
So the nice part about this is it doesn't need to be built into the validator software. Anyone that observes Gossip and Turbine can run this as a separate client. So likely we'll have many different ways to do this. The way that I'm thinking about it is we'll have a tool that you can attach to an already running validator, and then also a standalone client if you don't want to run it on the same box or impact your validator. And then, as you pointed out, only one person needs to report the behavior. So some validators might not, might find that it's not worth their time to be a reporter. And as long as at least one honest validator reports the behavior within 1 epoch, then we're fine.
There's a question from Blake about if anything is on testnet. I think you've deployed something, but is there anything that operators can interact with?
Yeah, nothing yet. I deployed a proof of concept just to see if it would work a month ago, but it's not. It's just a very bare bones. Like, it's not ready for public consumption yet.
Got it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Blake.
Sorry. Is there a dashboard or anything tracking the violations that are detected?
Yeah, so not yet, but once this goes live, the slashing program will populate these report accounts. So they're all PDAs of the slashing program. So any dashboard can pull these accounts. They're just regular accounts on chain. Each account will show the validator that committed the violation, what slot, all of that. So it's pretty straightforward to build a dashboard off of that.
So when you say that, do you mean an API would be available, or?
It would just be get program accounts.
Okay.
Yeah. You just do get program accounts on the slashing program. It'll show you all of the reports, and each report has all the info. Yeah.
Thanks. What about webhooks? Like, or is that good enough, or would it be possible to have a notification mechanism?
I think that'd be like an RPC thing, right? Like, so if you let's say maybe if you're a Helios customer, I'm sure you could set up a webhook, that hit that and build off of that. But I think the standard RPC tools, whatever the standard developer tools, would all be appropriate and work here because the data's on chain and in a explainable way.
Cool. Thanks.
Any more questions for Ashwin?
Ashwin, do you have a general time sense? Like not asking you to commit to like a time, but what do you think of like a reasonable timeline, a happy path timeline might look like?
Yeah. So for the reporting program, it's currently in implementation and the SIMD is out. So I would expect sometime early next year that we have the program that will report the violations. For the economics, we'll open up a GitHub discussion, sometime this week, either today or tomorrow. We expect the discussions to be quite involved, obviously, since this is a pretty sensitive topic. So I wouldn't expect discussions, and the SIMD also for the economic side has to go through the governance process, which takes a while. So I wouldn't expect anything in the first half of the next year. If anything, I would expect maybe late summer at the earliest for this to be rolled out.
Then I guess another forward-looking question. This is obviously the one potential type of slashing that will have to move forward and kind of go through there. But what's your rough roadmap for vote costs, or sorry, not vote cost, for vote violations?
Yeah. So I think the hard part is to actually get consensus and set up this infrastructure. After that happens, adding new types of violations should be more straightforward. So initially we plan, just duplicate blocks and then double voting. After that, so apart from duplicate blocks and voting violations, we don't have anything else on the docket. If there is something that comes up that we think should be slashing behavior, it'll have to be addressed in a subsequent proposal.
Yep.
The important thing is whatever we want to slash has to be a provable offense. So something like, I know people are always like, oh, this person is slow, right? Like they always submit their block slow. That's subjective. It's hard to quantify. So things like that are difficult to slash forward.
Yep. Do you do, and I guess, so I'm thinking through the curve that's on screen right now. How do you see, basically you have these two kinds of slashable events. Do you think those are two separate buckets, or would you basically compute this bucket being the total of vote violations and lockout violations and duplicate blocks? Do we consider those separately or together?
I think we could consider those separately. It would add a lot of complexity, especially to explain it to stakeholders. I think the easiest way to do it is just to count just raw number of violations and sum that up. That way we just have one curve. It's very simple to explain and understand.
Yeah, and I guess that's open for the economic and governance.
Yeah, that's open for discussion. So please chime in if you have any strong feelings. Yeah.
And then I think, and just so people know, when Ashwin's talking about a discussion page, the SIMD repo now has a discussions page. So we want to push these protocol level discussions. If they aren't quite SIMDs yet, but we're just figuring out, hey, what SIMD would be appropriate? That's where this discussions section would make the most sense. So here's the link to it if anyone's kind of curious. We've got a few discussions going right now, but I over time, I'm hoping to see this become more utilized and be a place of protocol level change discussion.
One more quick follow-up question. Let's say we're detecting voting violations and someone is making malicious or incorrect votes, let's say hundreds of times. Is that all different slashable events? And I assume so. What does the potential slashing look like there?
Yeah, so right now our thinking is that each violation should count independently. So if I vote maliciously 10 times, then it should count for 10 times of 10x my stake. Obviously, that's something that we can consider changing, but yeah, that's what we're looking at right now.
So like a person with 1% stake that spends an entire epoch trying to create duplicate blocks could get themselves into that 33% thing where all their stake gets slashed if they just continuously attack the network in that way.
Yeah. And yeah, I want to point out, like, this is, like, first of all, the validator code will stop you, right? It would be extremely rare for you to be able to do that without modifying the code. And then, yeah, I think this is also good for operators, like, you know, taking care of their validator. They should notice if something goes wrong, and you know, they can set up notifications to these accounts as well. So if they see that they've been reported for a slashing violation, they should understand it, shut down their validator, do whatever they can to fix the issue. And then, yeah, with this voting stuff, I see some questions in the chat about set identity. Yeah, so if you follow the, you know, I think Pumpkin's Pool had a pretty nice guide, like, you know, you move the tower, use set identity. Even in the worst case, if you mess all of this up, before the validator votes, it'll look on chain to see what its most recent vote is. And if its most recent vote is newer than what it thinks, then it will take steps to basically merge this together. But yeah, I mean, as long as you follow the best practices, you shouldn't double vote. There's been the votalizer bot has been running, you know, for months now in the Discord. And I'm sure many of you have done identity transitions during that time and haven't shown up there. So.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Ashwin? All right. Thank you, Ashwin. Let's move along. Really appreciate the discussion. Share my screen again, one sec. There we go. All right. So yeah, switching gears a bit. I'm sure many of you have seen discussions on X and elsewhere about Mempools and sandwiching that is happening on the network. The claims are from Temporal, but I'm seeing a lot of discussion about it. So I thought I'd just open up the floor here to see what people's thoughts are, what people would like to see, kind of like, you know, what people's thoughts around, I guess, the risk and the next steps are. Or maybe just ask people if they're aware of this. Put these in. Any thoughts, opinions? All right, I guess not. Okay, we can open up for, oh, go ahead, Michael.
Sorry. I'll throw out a comment. So for those who may have seen it, basically it speaks about a sandwich bot that's making $2 million a day, or an epoch at the moment, and proposes two solutions. Primarily, one is kind of a whitelist, where dApps then essentially only send transactions to whitelisted validators. So we say, okay, these validators are known to be good, not sandwiching, so we only send transactions to them in their leader slots. And the other solution is to re-enable the Jito mempool, the public mempool, which means anyone can sandwich. I think the whitelist option is not great because there could be 20, 30, 40 slots gaps between good validated leader slots. So then users would have to wait 10, 20 seconds for a transaction to be processed, which isn't great. But obviously the mempool option also has pros and cons. But I thought I'd just throw out those are the two options. I wonder if anyone has any more comments on those specific suggested solutions. I'm curious what people think about the Jito mempool being re-enabled.
I definitely have a negative sentiment towards a whitelist. Like even if maintained by a decentralized group, it's still an element of permission that I think I would like would like to look at any other option that that can still net benefit users while not creating a semi-permission environment. I think the permissionless principles of blockchain and of Solana, I think, are like personally just quite critical.
I would agree to that. I also want to add that the concept of a whitelist has existed, with the concept of MevProtect existing with Jito. And we see a lot of our users with Telegram bots not opting into MevProtect. And if you asked these Telegram bots, the number one thing they care about is fast inclusion. They would rather get faster inclusion 90% of the time than to use something like MevProtect and get slower inclusion. And so a whitelist is basically MevProtect, but I think it already exists. I think my opinion with sandwiching is that the solution needs to be at the protocol level, and I think where long term there's initiatives to get there. But short term, I actually am not a believer that the whitelist actually will solve the problem. I do not think users will opt into it. I know Helius offers that already, and users are just not interested in opting into it.
And are these users like individuals or like app creators, like Telegram bot creators?
Telegram bot creators give the optionality to their users on whether or not they want to enable MevProtect, and users are majority not opting into that. A lot of them, the kind of, and I've done a lot of consulting for Telegram bots, and like the kind of conclusion is that degens are investing in these meme coins with an expectation that they're going to 100x or go to 0. And so if they get a 10-20% worse price with their slippage, they don't care because it's probably going to 0 anyway, or it's 100xing and they don't necessarily care, but they want to get as early of an inclusion as possible.
So they're basically willing to pay the sandwicher to guarantee inclusion. Because that's like if you put out a sandwichable transaction, like the chances of someone else grabbing that and submitting a bundle and paying a significant tip is probably quite high. And so then, yeah, interesting.
And users actually like and I work a lot in Mev and like we worry about sandwiching a lot. Like not many of these Telegram bot users are complaining about sandwiching like that much. It's really not that hot of a topic to them, which is very interesting to me. But that's one thing to bring up.
Do you think that a majority of the sandwiching activity is from like the Telegram bots, like these users, or are they a small subset from your viewpoint?
I think the majority are from the Telegram bot users. I think that's the juiciest order flow. I think I think a lot of it's also like the Pump Fund UI and like Photon UI. But I think that's most of the meme coin flow comes from these bots.
Makes sense. Appreciate the explanation or the insight, really.
It raises an interesting question of have any victims actually complained?
Yeah.
All the people talking about sandwiching are the ones detecting it and the devs. But I'm not actually seeing
I think I think the and I work closely with Ben at Temporal, who wrote this article. I think the concern is less that users are complaining and more about the centralization of Mev. If someone is able to, back when the Jito mempool was online, it was competitive, and there was tip wars, and the profit from sandwiching got returned back to the stakers through Mev tips. And now, unfortunately, it's an individual or a few individuals that all of this profit is going to. Stakers are staking the nodes, not seeing any of that profit. And so there's a centralization of Mev that is potentially dangerous to Solana if that individual does not add any value back to the ecosystem. I think that's really the concern, is whose hands are this in.
Yeah, which ends up being like less value. Yeah. That makes sense.
Cool. Any other thoughts? Yeah, more just sort of negative opinions on whitelists. For what it's worth, I agree as well. I think you're hurting users who want to kind of be good to the chain by giving them slower inclusion. So I think the whitelists ultimately are not a great solution. Question on Jito and SFDP real quick. I think that's something we'd have to figure out and address once that decision gets made. But I think, just practically speaking, something like 90% of stake runs Jito. So if the mempool is enabled, I think we would have to allow that for SFTP. Sorry, Cypher, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I'm a big, I think that a lot of the solutions that I've been discussing and down in Art Basel, I had a lot of conversations, are really temporary solutions. At the end of the day, the protocol is designed that the leader owns their blocks. And so we could do whatever we want. But if we want to have something like Jito, I do believe that the concept of MedProtect with Jito is a marketing thing. There's no protocol level enforcement that bundles cannot get unbundled, or you can't sandwich bundles, or just because someone sends a single transaction bundle with MedProtect on, you can't sandwich it on the actual leader level. And so Jito can blacklist validators, and they can do that, of course. But I think it needs to be fully understood and appreciated that MedProtect is just doesn't exist, and the protocol is fundamentally designed how it's designed. And so we need to think about longer term solutions. And so if that's something like multi-propose or other solutions, that needs to be on our long term roadmap, which I know Anza is looking at.
Brian, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Hey guys, this is Brian from This is Brian from the Jito Foundation. Just wanted to chime in and say that this is an issue we've been thinking deeply about for over a year, really. I mean, some of the first kind of changes and discussion were happening, I remember, on Christmas Eve last year. So this is not the thread yesterday did not take anyone by surprise. There have been active discussions with the consortium with people involved in the Solana ecosystem on a daily basis for a couple of weeks now. I think there is a lot of data we need before we can really come to any conclusions. And so, there were some claims made and that were circulated yesterday. I think if you look at the data, the profits in absolute terms are high, but the kind of sensational concept of this person centralizing all stake in Solana is just not mathematically proven out at all. And so that is an existential catalyst for immediate action is not grounded in fact. There is a lot of other very interesting data that will help inform decisions going forward that a group of us are helping to aggregate. And I will just say this is an extremely complex problem. Jito, as well as everyone on this call, cares about Solana deeply. And so this isn't something where we're putting our head in our sands. I think there's paths in the medium term to more protocol level changes. The short-term situation has a lot of complexities around any of these solutions, which I think we've seen discussed here on Twitter and elsewhere. And so we take the health of Solana and user welfare extremely seriously, and we are thinking about it a lot, but that we don't want to be reactive to Twitter headlines before we've really gotten any data and evaluated all solutions.
Yeah, I think it's kind of echoing the importance of data. It's really hard to have a strong convicted opinion here without as much concrete data as possible.
All right. Any other thoughts there? Okay, sounds like that's it. Appreciate all the help and especially Ashwin jumping on and talking about slashing. Expect, like you mentioned, a SIMD GitHub discussion coming soon on that. And thank you for the discussion on sandwiching. Next call will be in 2025, so look out for an announcement for that as well. See you all in January.
Thanks, Sid.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.